So hi, everybody. My name is Alejandra, and over the next 10 minutes, I'm going to talk to you about my work in implementing control avoidance in commercial flight planning. My original title was way more complicated than that, but alas, I forgot what it was, so here we are. We're going to go simple. This work has been done in collaboration with the flight planning software company Flightkeys, based in Vienna, and of course, the university. You see? Oh, I don't know how to pass. Now. Okay, so we've seen Omaru and Raul mention contrails, but luckily for me, nobody explained what contrails are, so here we are. Contrails are those line-shaped clouds that we see trailing after an aircraft in cruise. They form when the hot exhaust gases enter into contact with the cool ambient air, the water condenses on the soot particles, they freeze, and they form a trail. And how they affect the climate, because you say, well, sounds great. Why do we care? We care because they can, on the one hand, act as a blanket, trapping part of the outgoing radiation underneath the layer of clouds, and they can also reflect part of the outgoing radiation back to space, having both a warming and a cooling effect. During the night, there's nothing to reflect back to space, so they're always warming. And given that in the Northern Hemisphere, where most of the contrails happen, we have, unluckily for us, more nighttime than daytime, especially during winter. Overall, the impact of contrails is said to be warming. You've seen this graph before. I think both Omaru and Raul used it, but this essentially says that from the total aviation net energy, net radiative forcing, it's believed that non-CO2 emissions, and especially contrails, because they are the biggest part, could be responsible for 2/3 of the total aviation net impact. Right, so this is the motivation. This is why we have to care about contrails. And now I'm gonna tell you what the two objectives of my thesis are. And in order to do that, we have to ask ourselves two questions. First, how has the research on contrail science changed over the last couple of decades? And how are contrails gonna be enforced, or contrail avoidance gonna be enforced in the years to come? So first, history lesson or state of the art. At the beginning, in the early 2000s, people started looking at preliminary contrail studies by blocking entire flight levels. Can we avoid contrail formations by blocking the areas where contrails could form? And the answers were yes, we can, but it's extremely inefficient. So then from 2008 onwards, they said, okay, instead of blocking entire airspaces, let's see if we can implement contrail avoidance in the optimization function of trajectories. Around the 2010, we changed tactic from can we avoid forming contrails to understanding if contrails are created equal and what is the warming impact of individual contrails. And here is where we have some of the models that some of the people are here mentioned, the COSIP model, which is older but was repurposed in the 2010s, and ACCFs and CCFs and other models that have appeared since then. And the results were shocking indeed. They said that contrails are not created equal and that approximately 2% of them could be responsible for the vast majority of the warming. And this is why here Raul, Omaru, and everybody that is going to come after me said, well, this is great, because when we were looking at blocking entire flight levels or rerouting entire fleets, the entire solution seemed pretty much a pain in the ass, sorry to say it, and very complex. But if we only have to reroute 2% of flights, then that seems like a pretty sweet deal, right? And that is why since the 2020s, we've been looking at how can we implement this operationally, and specifically for me and my first objective, how can we implement this commercially? So in the last PhD meetings, because this is my 4th year, shocking, I've been implementing different models of contrail avoidance, specifically the COSIP model and the Google model within the Flightkeys 5D optimization software, and we've published different results in 2 different papers which are linked there, but I'm not going to talk through them because I already mentioned them in the last PhD meetings. Instead, I'm going to focus on my second objective of the thesis, which is what I've been working on for the last year, and for that I've been going through the rabbit hole of aviation climate regulation. So I'm going to, since I put an entire year into it, I'm going to walk you guys through it, even though I'm guessing most of you don't really care that much, but you're going to have to bear with me. So we've heard mentioned CORSIA before. CORSIA, maybe you guys have heard about it, but you don't really know what it is. CORSIA is an offsetting scheme. That means that for international flights, whenever an airline goes beyond a certain baseline, which is 85% of the 2019 CO2 levels, they have to buy carbon credits to offset it. Carbon credits, you can think, well, then I just plant trees in my backyard. And yes, that is the idea of it. But the thing is that they have to be approved carbon credits by ICAO. And this is going to lead to an entire market scheme where, there's not going to be enough carbon credits and airlines might have to fight and, in auction to see who gets the majority of carbon credits. And this is a big deal for airlines because until now, nobody really cared because all of the participation was voluntary. But from 2027, it's not going to be voluntary anymore, and all international airlines or all ICAO members are going to have to start taking it seriously. On top of this, we have the EU ETS, which I'm going to summarize it. It's a cap and trade system, which is kind of similar in the sense we have a cap, a baseline of like how much is the maximum CO2 that airlines can produce. And whenever you produce a ton of CO2 throughout your year, an airline has to submit an allowance to the European Commission. So I burn 10,000 tons of CO2, I have to give you 10,000 allowances, as long as they're always below this cap. As you can imagine, the cap keeps reducing year by year, and the number of allowances also gets reduced year by year. You have to think about it this way. When aviation was first introduced in the EU ETS, they said, okay, I'm gonna give you 100% of the allowances below the cap. But then each year, you're gonna be given less and less and less. So if you want to pollute more, you have to buy more allowances. And by 2026, there's no more free allowances. That means that from now on, every single ton of CO2e that airlines produce, they have to pay for, either in auction or they have to change with other airlines. And why do we care for this? Well, we care for this because from 2027 on, before that, on top of that, the European Commission is the only regulatory body that had also acknowledged non-CO2 and the importance of non-CO2. So from 2025, airlines have been required to monitor them. And from 2027 as well, they're going to say that they're going to come up with a decision about how to enforce it. So now, why did I tell you all of this outside of to show off my knowledge in carbon regulations? Is because from 2027 onwards, airlines are going to have to pay a lot of money for CO2. And maybe even more money for non-CO2. So what does this mean? This means that from my perspective, as someone who has experience within the airline industry, we have to look at a way that we can enforce non-CO2 emissions, so make sure that airlines take it seriously without sucking them dry. And that is my second objective of my thesis. And that is why I have gone through this rant of looking at the carbon regulations. So what I did in my thesis at the end is that I made a proposal about how this could be done in an equitable way. And we looked at both the executed trajectory, the ADS-B trajectory, as well as the flight plan. We analyzed it through COSIP, and then we put it through a decision matrix. So the idea of this proposal is to say, okay, outside of how much non-CO2 warming an airline has produced, I want to look at what was the intent of this airline when it came to flying the flight routes that it chose, because the current models are not always accurate, the forecast models can change, and depending on which model you use, that is something different, you can also come up with different results. So we have, if you produce no contrails, you don't get taxed. If you produce contrails and you didn't care about it, you get taxed. The amount of this taxation is not fixed, but we set up like an example, which we're gonna talk about later. And then if you showed that you filed and flew a contrail avoidance flight plan, but you still produced contrails because the forecast went wrong, then you should be reduced from the base taxation. And if you tried to fly a contrail avoidance flight plan, but you were not allowed because of weather, because of ATC or something else, you should also get a reduction. Luckily for me, at the time when we made this proposal, I was in the midst of doing an actual trial with one of an airline, so I could actually get some example trajectories to showcase each of these cases. An airline that actually flew a contrail avoidance flight plan and managed to reduce contrail warming because of that. Airline that tried to fly contrail avoidance and didn't fully manage for specific reasons, and flights that just never really attempted it. And within this example, that it's in a preprint and it's in process of review, we gave an example with an actual price that we took from the CO2 pricing at the time in December 2025. So I'm not gonna go through the numbers, but it's the idea of showcasing how airlines could save money by implementing contrail avoidance, even if it's not always going to work out for them, and how regulators could use this as a base point to be fair when it comes to airlines. Currently, there's only one other model, which is called NEATS, that is the official one by the European Commission to monitor non-CO2 emissions. And while it's perfectly fine, they don't capture intent. They don't consider the fact that airlines might have to pay to burn extra CO2 to burn contrails. They use BARA models instead of airline-specific models, and they essentially ignore many of the forecast and ATC limitations. Yes,
10 minutes
this is
already.
the end.
Okay.
Okay, so with this being said, I'm done. I'm just gonna go very fast through the achievements of the last 4 years. My first objective was to implement control avoidance in commercial flight planning. This was done. Then we did flight simulations within the environment in different capacities, and we have published a conference paper and 2 journal papers on the results of this. Then we have looked at the MRV and regulation and made a policy proposal based on this, which already has a paper that is also in preprint. Then we did flight trials, so one of the biggest pleasures of my work is to be able to see the things that we are researching actually come to life and work with airlines in actually avoiding control avoidance practically. And then now I'm also in the process of finishing writing my PhD thesis, which I will handle in the 20th of June. And on the process of that, we've done too many conferences. Yeah. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay.